Hello, and welcome to another episode of Her Story, Everyday Activism in Africa's Fight Against Gender-Based Violence. My name is Ronald E. Stevens, and I'm Mosaic's Program Director and your host. For today's episode, we are thrilled to introduce you to an extraordinary guest, Joyce Lang. Joyce's journey is a testament to the power of intersectionality in the fight against gender-based violence. As a sustainability activist in the GBV sector, she has embarked on a journey to address the interconnected challenges of violence and environmental sustainability. Her innovative approach sheds light on the often overlooked connections between gender-based violence and environmental degradation. Welcome. Hey listeners, and welcome back to our podcast called Her Story, Everyday Activism in Africa Against GBV. Today we are joined with Joy Lang, and we are so happy to have you here, Joy. Welcome to our podcast.
Thank you so much, and thanks for having me.
Thank you, Joy. So, the premise of our podcast was really just to think about ways in which we can have everyday activists join us in conversation and give us a few gems to work with, tell us a little bit about their memories of their activism and how that kind of grew. So, Joy, we are just so happy to have you here, and we are very curious to learn about your activist journey. Do you mind telling us a little bit about how you became an activist and what that moment was like for you?
I think for me, if I think back and if I reflect, I look back at me as an 11-year-old
Sure.
in the town, living in the township in a 2-bedroom house, where our whole household was woken up by a woman running down and banging on our door. And my mom and my dad obviously going to the front door. I think it was probably middle of the night. And this was the neighbor next door whose husband was beating her up. And her only place of safety was to my mother.
Neighbors.
Yeah. And of course, he stopped at the gate, her husband. And that for me was my first recollection of abuse and my first insight into how my mother and my father dealt with it, and especially my mother. And then I got to hear, because I'm the youngest of 6 girls, that my granny was quite a woman on the West Coast, because she used to be a midwife. And when there was trouble in households, she was called. And so I saw the same thing playing out with my mom. And my mom started the first netball club in the community. My mom started a branch of our church as a Sunday school in the community. And women would always come to our home. And so there would always be assistance, sharing of food stuff and so on. And as a domestic, my mom was a domestic worker before she met my dad. And she never worked, but my dad didn't want her to work. And my mom started, I think I was about 13, 14. In the heart of apartheid, we traveled the whole of South Africa for 2 weeks as a community who would come to my mom's house and save money in a little black hardcover. And the
I actually see those with the red
yes,
lining. Yeah.
and the hotel people would come to our home and collect the money on a weekly basis. And I think in terms of the activism and almost like the silent defiance of what was happening
At the
time. My mom, I would come back in the new year after the 2 weeks holiday and be the only person that had visited in primary school, the Union buildings or the big old in Kimberley. And, and today, many of those parents who felt it good enough to take their children on those bus tours are scattered all over the world. And getting back to the assistance in terms of the activism, I think that growing up in the heart of apartheid, for me, we always needed to, as a community, depend on one another. With the riots, the police are coming down this road or that road,
Thinking about how to
yeah,
strategize
and all of
keeping
those
everyone
things.
safe.
So I think that was the catalyst, growing up in the community where my parents would assist another family would assist us in places in times of need. My mother looked after children in the road whilst the mothers went to work as a way of also earning income. And I had a adopted brother because his mother just never came to fetch him one night.
Sure.
And he passed on at the age of 54, about 7 years ago. So that was my brother, and there was no formal social
adoption process
and all of that. So I think the activism beats through my blood. When I look at the fact that I stand on the foundations of women that have really made a lot basically out of nothing.
Sure.
And saw the need to assist community.
And be present for others.
Yes, absolutely.
That is absolutely wonderful. I love the way that you phrase that. Activism beats through my blood, you said. Yeah? That's amazing. So I'm thinking about that, and I'm also thinking about your journey and what I know about your journey. So maybe share with the listeners how you actually moved to getting to that place. Because though it beat through your body, as you said, or through your blood, it wasn't the consistent thing that you had done throughout your professional career. So maybe take us on that journey.
So finishing matric, there wasn't money for me to go and study.
Sure.
And I got a job as a casual 3-day-a-week worker at Woolworths head office. And that's really where the journey also started, because as a 3-day-a-week casual, after I think 2-3 years, I became permanent and then started working in various departments. I started in finance, I moved over to HR, I moved over to HR in Woolies Adderley Street, but more so to assist with help with the opening of Woolworths Waterfront.
Oh, yeah.
And from there, moving back into community development, community affairs department, it was called then, with the reconstruction and development funds, and that companies had to put aside to develop communities and so on. So I did the bursaries for staff, bursaries for their children, did the bursaries at tertiary institutions for scarce skills like food technology and textile technology. I was part of employment equity committees. I did recruitment, and in 2007, 2008, there was the economic downturn, and there was huge retrenchments. And, my journeys at Woolworths stretched over 20 years.
Sure.
And I must say that I've always told myself that wherever I go, I will collect the tools and put them in my backpack. And that's essentially what I did at Woolworths.
Yeah.
Woolworths was one of the companies, and I believe that they still do it today, where staff can go and study further.
Yeah.
So I did a lot of tertiary education and got bursaries myself as well. And so that backpack was constantly being filled as well with knowledge and skill and so on. And I think through the journey, the knowledge and the skill also develops your attitude. And you also see how you are able to shift thinking. I was part, for example, which I think was Woolworths was one of the key employers to do that first. When we became a new democracy, we decided as a corporate affairs department to take our employees who were never ever experienced the township on a township tour.
Oh, wow.
And we used to organize tea at, for example, an NGO that we were funding.
Yeah.
We used to organize lunches. We used to go to different NGOs. And I remember, I think the one that was very thought-provoking for especially our white colleagues was going into Langa and going into those hostels.
Yes, seeing like how the migrants, like the
Seeing
labor,
how they
spaces,
live,
yeah.
the spaces, 3 beds on top of each other with little curtains in between, communal living and all of that. People got back onto that bus, heartbroken. Mind shifts took place, and I think that was very forward thinking.
But also the start of a transformational conversation that's happening at Woolworths.
Absolutely. And so that also helped us, and for me it was critical because part of my role as well was to expose the youth. To understand that when you walk into a Woolies store, the products just don't drop into the store, you know.
Yeah.
And so we used to do sort of expose. And we used to invite schools, but we would make sure that we invite schools from, you know, your white community, your colored community, your African community, so that there's that integration on the day as well.
Sure.
And ensure that teachers come along as well. And I mean, just the practical examples that the employees of Woolies showed them. For example, they would, early morning, the food technologist would come and drop a piece of a leg and a thigh frozen bought from another retailer, and say that, watch this, it's going to thaw, we're catching the water, and weigh a Woolies later on, weigh the Woolies leg and thigh. So what you actually thinking that you're paying less for is actually water. You know? And so, you know, weighing up things like that and just seeing how the lights go on for young people to know that there's a food technologist, there's a textile technologist, there's an estate planner, you know, those different
There's professions
roles
within just like the Woolworths brand itself, or I mean, any
retailers,
kind of
you know, and it was, teachers always used to come and say this was really mind-blowing because all they know is teaching.
Sure.
And so, you know, I'm sharing this with you, but this was really for me, it gives you an holistic view of my exposure within the corporate world. And when it came to 2007, 2008, with a huge retrenchment, it really got to me, it affected me, and I had started having conversations with my husband. And the one thing that stood out for me the most was the fact that when I used to be part of recruitment panels and part of the employment equity committees, I would see how our people fall short in interviews. Because for simple things, sometimes they don't even get to the interviewing stage because they didn't have a covering letter, they didn't specify what job they were applying for, and just the
simple
CV,
things that will keep them out of the system.
And so through that, it really also pumped through my blood that I needed to go out there and help our people. What I then did was I went back into the community where I grew up, which was Bridgetown, Athlone.
Okay.
My mom was still living there. And I resigned from Woolies, and I engaged the IT department, and I was then seen or treated as an enterprise development
Sure.
candidate.
Sure.
And they came because I said to them, this is my business plan, this is what I want to do, because people don't have computer skills, they don't know what must be on the CV and so on. So I started an internet cafe.
Oh, wow.
That was the idea.
Yeah.
And Woolies came and put 10 PCs in, put a hub in the internet a system and all of that. But it turned out to be a recruitment, a placement center. It turned out to be a women's development center. It turned out to be...
So it was the hub
It
that
was
you
the
had,
hub
that you
that,
had
yes.
imagined. Yeah.
But I never realized, because, you know, and this is what I always say to young people, strive to find your passion. Once you find your passion, you will always have work.
Sure.
So for me, that example of wanting to start an internet cafe to help the people in the community, it extended. It extended to me being able to send CVs out, me being able to assist them to fax, me being able to get people in to do PC literacy training, women's development, women's workshops
Initiatives,
and
yeah.
initiatives and stuff like that. So it really became a hub.
Sure.
But
sure.
whilst I was at 10 years of my years at Woolies was also spent in volunteering.
Okay.
And that was because there was the NGO St. Anne's, which is the oldest women's shelter. And they, the then director approached me, Elizabeth Peterson, to come and serve on the board. I was in a state of shock because I didn't know what it meant to serve on the board, and I actually said to her, I'm studying. And so maybe in a year's time, thinking she would forget. And lo and behold, she came back the following year, and me being the person that I am, in terms of keeping my word,
Yeah.
I then went and served on the board. So that's how I served on the St. Anne's board for 10 years,
Okay.
whilst working at
Woolworths.
Woolworths. And so when I started this little business, I was still
on the board
serving on the board. And that was the time when Elizabeth got her scholarship to go and study abroad. And we then, as the board, recruited a new director. And through that, the activism, I think,
really was strengthened.
Yes, was strengthened through that. And I was asked to handhold the position because the director that we recruited only stayed for 13 months.
Sure.
And went back to a
previous
position. And after 3 months, because the board was doing a recruitment, they said to me, why don't you also apply? But the 3-month contract that they gave me was a part-time contract. I must emphasize that.
Yeah.
But it was never 25 hours because
that kind of work.
That kind of work.
You can't do 25 hours.
No, you can't do 25 hours. I think you do 35 hours.
Yeah,
35 hours a day. Because it's just nonstop.
Yeah. And so when you took on this position, you also, what happened to your hub?
So what happened to my hub is that I had 2 people in a span of almost 2 years take
Coached
over.
and developed, yeah.
Yes. But in the end, it just didn't work. Because what I would hear from the community is that there was a party that happened after hours in the hub.
In the hub itself.
Yes, and stuff like that. So in the end, I donated a lot of the stuff to St. Anne's,
Sure.
to support St. Anne's computer room as well. And so I became full-time the director in April 2009.
Wow. Wow, wow, wow. What a journey. Because, and I emphasize this because I think it's quite interesting having gone from corporate. Because if you're in corporate, the mindset is that you usually stay there or
Yes.
you do what you do, which is like you become an entrepreneur. But it's never like going from there, going entrepreneur, and then going back into connecting with the community. And so for me, that's like where the strength in terms of like your understanding of caring for community and being connected to community
Yeah.
had always come from. Now, your time at St. Anne's. It's now not a distant memory. It's only
3 months.
3 months
Mm-hmm.
post your time at St.
Yes.
Anne's. And I want to ask you to give me a sense of, what was like your greatest challenge being in St. Anne's or being at St. Anne's? And maybe give us also a sense of like, what was your greatest achievements while you were there as well?
I think my greatest challenge, I think they're quite balanced. There's two.
No, you clearly thought about this.
Yes. The one is obviously funding, and the other one was managing people. And at the same time, the success was, for me, that's why I'm also saying that it's quite balanced, is getting it right with managing people.
Yeah.
You know, and it was a journey for me as well, being the results-driven person and working in a shelter setting. Everything happens all the time, anytime. And so when you come in with your set diary, know that there are going to be days and weeks that's not going to
happen.
happen. And so I also, being the person that I was, in terms of being results driven, had to learn to relinquish control.
Sure.
And I think that's a big challenge for NGO leaders, which is to be able to hand over, but also nurture and coach the person to do it. And you must also be at peace with the fact that they might not do it
the way you want it.
Yes.
Yeah.
But it's good enough. It's not your standard,
Sure.
but it is acceptable, it's good enough.
Yeah.
Nothing is falling through the cracks.
Yeah.
And as long as nothing is falling through the cracks, that's good enough. But at the same time, so the employees at St. Anne's, all of them, I think there's only 2 of the 13, are there between 22 and 8 years.
Oh, wow.
And so that gives you an insight into the fact that people love what they do and they are good at what they do. Despite the fact that we have that constant challenge of funding, which is also something that I learned, that yes, as a leader, you are responsible for 12 families, 13 families, and you cannot give them that.
Sure.
To carry and worry about. And so it would only be myself and the finance person and
It's
the
always
board,
the finance people. Yeah.
and the board, obviously, that would know that there are these challenges. But I think that what is critical also for leaders to know and to take note of is your relationship building. And that you cannot burn bridges. I mean, I have, in these, 14 years of being at St. Anne's, been able to, and that is through relationship building. I've been able to pick up the phone or send an email and say, I need to speak with you because it's different time zones. I know that you were going to give your funds in April of the following year, but we need it now in November. You know?
Yeah.
And so
this is what's happening.
This is what's
why.
happening.
Yeah.
And if you can keep that kind of rapport and relationship going, and I think what is also looking back is to say thank you
Mm.
and to acknowledge people for the little. I remember serving as a board member. My mother-in-law, my now mother-in-law, lived in Woodstock, about 5 roads away. And she brought goods also, knowing that I was volunteering on the board as well. And I remember, and I always talk about that, I remember her face and the joy that she received and the pride of, and I think
Contributed,
yeah, she took a bag of clothing and items.
Mm.
She got a card in the mail
Oh, wow.
to say thank you for the goods that you have received, and
And how it was
and it
used,
stood
yeah.
there in her
Shame.
lounge, and so if you can acknowledge not
The
just the
contributions,
50,000s and so on, each and every contribution, it goes a long way, because that my mother-in-law went to tell her whole block,
Yeah, and I get others to,
yes,
to
and people
encourage
come
others.
in, yes,
Yeah.
and to encourage people. And so acknowledgement is
It's
critical
key.
to survival in the NGO world.
Yeah, yeah.
And in terms of the successes, you cannot do this on your own. You need your team.
Yeah.
And you need to acknowledge your team. And you need to constantly motivate your team. As part of the sustainability program, I used to, we also started a charity shop
Okay.
in November 2019.
Sure.
And we've not looked back. In my last month, they had made 40,000
Oh, wow.
from that little charity shop a month. So that used to be my justification for taking the team on a breakaway, a retreat for 1 night, 2 nights, and just to be. And it would always be to a place in the Western Cape that they've
Probably never heard of or been to.
Yeah. And those are motivational things. So it's not like we're taking funders' money.
And just squandering
Yes.
it. Yeah.
And so I also remember now, I still say we. Now, they only do 2 major events because of the shop generating income. And it was the Celebration of Love breakfast and breakfast fundraiser during 16 days.
Sure.
But we used to get the support of artists like Vicky Sampson would often come and sing a few songs at our breakfasts, and Kim Louie and Tina Scow, and those people over the years.
Yeah.
So what started out in October 2009 as a small fundraiser is now like
grown into its own legs. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And people used to call the office to find out when is the next breakfast.
Okay.
And for the past couple of years, St. Anne's didn't have to
do
advertise.
marketing.
No, because companies would purchase tables.
Oh, wow. That's
and
amazing.
the donations would just come in.
Yeah.
In terms of food stuff for the breakfast, vouchers from the waterfront, vouchers from hotels, 2 night stays. So at the breakfast, we could actually also do a raffle with that. So I think the November breakfast was close to 30,000 in one morning.
Sure.
So it's those kinds of relationship building that
really leads to the success.
Yeah, leads to the success.
The
and the
work.
team, there's a little fundraising committee,
Yeah,
and there's a little breakfast.
So they also take
thing.
ownership
They
of
take
like what's
ownership,
happening.
yeah.
So just to go back to the sustainability plan, give us a better sense of like what that sustainability plan was and when you were given the plan and how you've been able to work through it.
So at our strategic planning session in 2017, when you are in the NGO world, the future, when you look into it, is bleaker and bleaker and bleaker. And that is why, as a organization, we decided to look at sustainability and self-sustainability. And so I had to draw up a plan for the board in terms of what it is that I deemed would be doable for us. And so the first thing was for us to look at a solar power system.
Not knowing that we'll need it.
Not knowing that we'll need, that's so absolutely true. And so that was achieved. We looked at water harvesting system.
Wonderful.
And so the water that we harvest manages to flush all the toilets, and there are 7 on the premises. And then we also looked at establishing a charity shop.
Sure.
And as part of that, we got a funder who supported us with a bakkie. And so as part of the charity shop, we promote that we will collect the goods from you if you live within a 20-kilometer radius of the organization. And that has really been the saving grace through hard times, because just with the electricity saving from in winter, spending about 8,000 rand a month on one house, and in summer about 4,500, 5,000. There's no expenses now at all. So that was
huge.
really
It's
a huge
savings,
saving.
yeah. No, that's
Yeah.
absolutely wonderful. So we're also at this stage now where you are in, not retirement, you're taking a bit of a pause. And in this moment, I'm wondering if you could just look back and think about, where we are as a country in terms of GBV. You've seen transitions happening within the St. Anne's home. You've seen the type of survivor who comes through. And you know what is still currently happening in the country. And so I'm asking you to create a bit of a visual for us about what your opinions are about how we've moved on the matter of GBV in South Africa.
So if I look back when I started at St. Anne's, 2009, I came into a space where the Shelter Forum then met and discovered that all of us are receiving different types of funding from the one government.
Oh,
So my belief was that if you were in a white area, your shelter was established in a white area, you got a little bit more than a shelter was established in a previously desert or a colored area at that time. And we worked together as shelter managers then, and we engaged government. We, as the Shelter Forum, I also started the Western Cape. I'm the founder of the Western Cape Women Shelter Movement, which is flourishing today.
Yes. Congratulations.
And so established that from the desk of St. Anne's. And that was really, for me, I think, the catalyst in terms of how we've moved, where we had this disparity of shelters getting different types of funding and funding models, where the equity came. But that was also because we engaged with the National Shelter Movement as a provincial body. And we worked with the Heinrich Böll Foundation, who's really been the catalyst in terms of shifting things within the GBV space. So if I look back at where we started with the Heinrich Böll Foundation and the National Shelter Movement, and slowly carving our way through the issues in terms of not having legislation, of regulating things within the country, because shelters in different provinces, we discovered that they are also having different funding models. Government, so it's kind of you at different governments. And that was really the catalyst And for me, I feel very privileged that I was part of the team to go and visit the CGE, the Commission on Gender Equality. We
Sure.
had the first meeting with them. I think that was 2017, 2018. And we asked them to do the investigative report.
Sure.
And they did that report. And what the report revealed was that shelters were critically underfunded. But what then transpired from that is that they weren't able to hold the different government departments to account,
Sure.
which led to public hearings. And so for me, that flow, it was all, the foundation was created for us to shift slowly but surely. And so the awareness has gone nationally. I was part of the public hearings in December 2019 in Johannesburg, where government departments, the different government departments were called in. Some of them were told to leave because they didn't bring the correct information. And that, I think, was really a step in the right direction. We're not where we need to be, but the awareness has been created. The different types of legislation is busy being written and have been concluded and so on. So really there is still hope, and as we know, the wheel turns so slow, but as long as it's turning in the right direction, and we cannot stop holding government to account.
Yeah. And also what I hear from you, which is quite powerful, is that everything that you're doing in terms of like the research is just evidence-based work. So not just saying we want this as a feeling, but we want this because we know that there's a disparity. And we know this for fact, and we've done the research for it.
And you know, you are now reminding me of when we did the first set of research, and the Heinrich Paul had a round table and invited government officials, Western Cape government officials.
Sure, to come and join the conversation.
And from that, the chief director, the then chief director, said that he would like to visit the shelters. And quickly, the shelter managers that were there, yes, of course, you can come. And we did an itinerary for him. So from their offices to St. Anne's is like 4 kilometers. And
just
then they went to Sisters Incorporated and to Sarki Bartman. But they first just did St. Anne's and Sisters on one day.
Sure.
And, you know, when he came through, when I took him on a tour, I never forget, that was the 5th of October, 2013, 12 or 13. And he was like, I am flabbergasted. I'm shocked. When I took him on a tour of St. Anne's homes, he said, I cannot believe that you do what you do with the little that we gave you. And rest assured that we are definitely you're going to see changes happening. Sure. And so the changes happened, and we also understood that, you know, with government, they also get allocated a piece of the pie that comes from national. And so they also have to then allocate that into the different programs and all of that as well. But it was a step in the right direction. And the thing is, when I say hold government to account, you have to, because as the Western Cape Women's Shelter Movement, the president spoke about salary bands being a minimum wage, and yet a few months later we got our transfer payment agreement where it was a stipend to house mothers, and so we could attach the president's statement from NEDLAC to our letter to say that this
needs to look different.
This needs to look different because this is legislated here. And, you know, so it took a few months, but we get acknowledgement from the Western Cape government in terms of saying we acknowledge receipt of your letter, and rest assured we'll get back to you, and so on. And so those are the positive changes and the shifts that took place that we were part of. And so, as I say, as activists, you can never stop.
Sure. So I have one closing question, and that is more just, I guess, in terms of looking back again, because you have all this time to reflect now, but it's to say to yourself, like, what is the kind of things that you wish you had known before you started in 2009 at St. Anne's and taking on this work in the sector?
There's so much, but the one thing that I wish that I had known, which I also think there's still a lack of today, is my rights. I know my rights now, but I'm not so sure that the person working on a farm in the Breede River Valley knows her rights or his rights.
Can access it as easily.
And there's a lots of work to be done in that area, and it needs to start from the early childhood development stages already. And that's the one thing, because I think that when we know our rights as a human being, we will respect the next person. Absolutely. Because we would want respect in return.
Absolutely.
And I think humanity would be much better if we can kind of use that as a grounding.
Wow. We always talk about knowing our rights and being able to understand how to activate it and where to activate it, because that's the ways in which civil society can actually take on government and keep them to account.
Absolutely.
So, Joy, I want to say thank you. This has been a wonderful conversation. We really appreciate all the work that you have done. And in your time of rest and reflection and pause, we hope that you really actually also get to celebrate, the ways in which you were able to add value to the sector and grow in the sector and grow the sector itself. And we hope that we'll find you back in some kind of capacity. We don't know what yet, but we hope we'll find you back. And we just want to, as an organization, at Mosaic, just want to say thank you for your contribution.
Thank
we
you so
really
much.
appreciate everything that you've done.
Thank you so much, and thanks for having me, and thanks for doing this. I think there's a great need for this, because it would just motivate activists and young aspiring people out there.
Absolutely. And to the listeners, thank you so much for tuning in again, and we are looking forward to for you joining us in the next episode, which will be coming out very, very soon.
If you or anyone you know is experiencing abuse or is in need of a protection order, you are not alone. Help is available. You can contact Mosaic on 021 761 7585 or drop us a message on social media at Mosaic NGO. For emergencies, please contact your local police station. Alternatively, to access places of safety for women and children affected by GBV nationally, contact one of the 24-hour helplines showing on your screen. Standing together for safe relationships, homes, and communities.